You have 9 o'clock. I'd like to call the October 16th meeting of the Person Board of County Commissioners to order at this time, recognizing that we do have a quorum. I'll ask Commissioner Sims if he'll lead us in invocation, and Commissioner Puryear lead us in our Pledge of Allegiance, and recognizing again, too, that we do have a quorum.
Let us pray, if you will. Dear Heavenly Father, we thank you for this day you've blessed us with, and we thank you for the many blessings you've given us. We ask that you would lead us and guide us as we go through our county commissioner meeting today and give us wisdom to make good decisions for our county. Lift up those who are suffering. We pray for those countries that are going through war, and we just lift them up and pray that someday we will have peace. We ask that you watch over our EMS, sheriff's departments, police, our soldiers who are at war, and just pray that you will keep them safe as well. Lead us and guide us as we go forth. We pray this in your most heavenly name. Amen.
Would you please rise and join us in the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
First order of business is discussion, adjustment, and approval of the agenda as presented, with one change. We would like to remove closed session number 2 from our agenda. Any other comments or adjustments?
Move for approval.
A motion on the floor for approval. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? None. Motion carried. At this point in our regular meetings, we do have 10 minutes set aside for public comment to bring forward comments from the public concerning county business. Madam Clerk, do we have anyone signed up?
Yes, sir, Mr. Chair. We have 4 individuals signed up to speak today.
All right, and
The first one, we'll give 2.5 minutes per person.
yes, please.
IT, can you please set the time clock for 2.5 minutes? The first one is Teresa Matthews of Garrett Road, Roxborough.
It's out here.
Sorry.
That's okay. Good morning. My
Good
name
morning.
is Teresa Matthews, and I live at 788 Huff Garrett Road in Roxborough. I'm addressing you all today on behalf also of my neighbors, Robert Leeds at 175 Hidden Hills Road, Tamara Finn at 61 Hidden Hills Road, Sherry Westbrooks at 293 Hidden Hills Road, Virginia Klein at 954 Huff Garrett Road, John Penny at 11 Hidden Hills Road, and Tracy Simpson at 920 Huff Garrett Road. On October 9th, I was informed by Jeffrey Brooks of the Broadband Infrastructure Office at the North Carolina Department of Information Technology that my address is currently not listed in the broadband grant eligible program area. I have DSL internet and it is operating at a mere 8 megabits per second. We're simply crippled with slow internet issues. In reviewing the minutes of the October 3rd, 2022 Board of Commissioners meeting, it is my understanding that Person County has allocated $2.75 million to address the rural internet inequities that exist. High-speed internet access is no longer an amenity but a necessity for all. The COVID area has redefined the workforce and school settings. I'm appealing to you all today to include our subdivision in this advance of fiber optic internet accessibility. Thank you for your time and consideration of this very important matter.
Could I ask you the name of that subdivision, or did you
Well,
say that?
we're in Olive Hills. We call it the Hidden Hills Road Group.
Okay, all right, thank
So
you.
it's off Maurice Daniels.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next, we have Elizabeth Bratcher of 976 Estate Road.
Thank you for having me today.
Good morning.
In Person County, we have about 90 children in our DSS system, and yet we only have about 10 foster families assisting these 90 children. So where are most of these children housed? Are they housed in other counties? Are they housed at DSS, or even worse, are they housed in a correctional institution? But we have a system, and it works. Or does it? To place this in perspective, a child followed by the system committed suicide in 2022 by hanging after placement with an abusive and mentally ill parent. To be clear, DSS knew the history of this parent. Was suicide really the reason for this child's death? Because the parent committed suicide 2 weeks after. So did the child commit suicide, or was something else involved? Did the parent commit suicide due to guilt? Either way, the child was in the system, and the system worked, didn't it? Here's a current case where a child in the system was doing well in foster care. He was sent back to live in a squalid home environment with his mother, older sister, grandmother, and uncle returning from being incarcerated. At least 3 of these adults had addiction problems. After a few months with the family, the young boy found his sister dead of an overdose, and about 10 months later, he found his mother dead of the same. He was then placed in the care of his father, who he never knew, who was addicted to drugs, emotionally abusive, and unemployed. DSS placed this child back into another environment of addiction, poverty, and emotional insecurity. But the system is working, isn't it? Today, your board's going to review options for the organizational restructure of human services. My suggestion is to bring an independent DSS management auditor to provide a report to review the practices, management, HR, and positions at DSS. It is my belief, upon information, there's a problem of cronyism, leading to corruption and mismanagement. The definition of cronyism is the appointment of friends and associates to positions of authority without proper regard to their qualifications. If you investigate DSS, you will see the potential relationships that are within the organization. It's even out there on social media platforms where employees are very bold and post such media. Former Commissioner P.J. Gentry uncovered this issue 2 years old, and nothing was done. And since then, a child has died. So I end with, where are those 90 children? Who is looking after them? The case of Penny DeYoung and others have shown a tipping point. And whether you realize this or not, Person County residents are not the only ones shedding light on this issue. I'd just like to end with this. There are others outside of the state who have approached these issues and have won legal battles. And here are some recent headlines about DSS and other areas. Judge okays class action suit alleging Oregon foster care dysfunction. New Jersey's child care welfare declared transformed after 20 years after an unspeakable tragedy. Deemed too broken to fix, San Bernardino County Child Services is sued on behalf of nearly 6,000 kids. A coalition is forming in our community, and outreach is taking place. Many of us here, and those unable to be here today, intend to meet with other organizations who have realized the same thing. And finally, a child's life is like a piece of paper on which every person leaves a mark. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay.
Next, we have Sabrina Verrier of 4196 Oxford Road.
Good morning.
Good morning.
I'm gonna edit on the fly a little bit because Liz was able to cover a few things that I was gonna speak about. So my name is Sabrina Verrier. Many of you may recognize my name. I've emailed you all at some time or spoken with you. I'm a foster parent here in Person County. And as Liz can attest to the overall, I have my own specific reason to be here. I have read over your agenda for today, and I just have a few things that I'd like to keep fresh in your minds while we go ahead with it. While I was working with Person County Department of Social Services, I experienced a plethora of problems with processes and legalities, but here are the top few. I picked up my very first foster child from another foster parent. I was not ID'd. Not one single person from Person County Social Services chose to be there when I did so. I could have been anybody who picked that child up and walked out with him. Fortunately, I'm a good foster parent, and I loved that little boy. I was emailed documents to fill out from my social worker that already had foster parents' social security numbers in them and addresses, and when I addressed this with her, I never received even an email back from her to know that what was done was wrong. So I downloaded the form that was blank from the internet, and I sent it in to her with my information. Although I had no choice, it was a bit nerve-wracking seeing that someone else's had already been sent. I asked for help over and over again from all different people within the system. I emailed the director, Carlton Paler. I would say over 30 times in the 2 years that I've been working with them, I have never received one email or phone call back from him. That's broken. You're at the top and you can't respond to somebody who is taking care of the children in this county. I could read to you several stories, but I don't have enough time. So I want to leave you with this. The definition of something that all children and foster parents, as well as bio parents, go through in this system is about ambiguous loss. Ambiguous loss happens when you are grieving someone who is still living. It's different than grief than you experience when someone you love dies. That loss is finite and certain. There is no question you should feel pain about that. But ambiguous loss happens when something or someone profoundly changes or disappears. There's no way to get around that. It's like a Polaroid that is disappearing backwards. I think about it, and I'll close with this. It is up to you to help minimize the effects of ambiguous loss. It is up to you to make a change. Change has to come within to start. Maybe that means new leaders. Maybe that means training and investigation. All I'm asking is that there is transparency. I saw that there is potential to add people like myself or Miss DeYoung to a new board, and I can't stress it enough. Let us help. We are uniquely positioned to see the sides that you don't, and I promise we will be there to help you along the way. Thank you.
Thank you. Madam Clerk.
Next, we have Faye Castaneda from 921 Street Store Road.
Good morning.
Good morning.
You see, I didn't come with any papers. I might not even speak like I should, but I'm gonna speak with what God's put on my heart. I personally, I don't know Penny DeYoung. I am acquaintance with her. I've gotten, friendlier with her doing Facebook and when all this happened. And come to find out, she lived 3 doors down from me. But the only thing that really, and I prayed about this, this situation, the mother of these 2 innocent boys lost 2 dogs that animal control didn't even give back. One they had to put down. I was also let known she had also lost a horse that was malnourished, that she couldn't get that back. So my question to all of you today, in your heart, why they wouldn't give animals back, but they would give 2 young boys back that doesn't even know really who she is. She was, those 2 small boys, I know from when I realized she was my neighbor. My son played with one of her sons. They grew up, went to school together. She's always been the sweetest lady. And I know nothing in her heart but goodwill for these children. And I just wish, it breaks my heart, and Lord is helping me speak because I'm not a speaker. It breaks my heart to know that those 2 innocent boys went to a mother that they didn't know. They're asking for their mom and dad, who they think are their mom and dad. And that social services degraded the whole situation when she was giving them a last hug. And they literally took the child and said, that's enough. I seen that. And that's all I wanted to say. I just want y'all to each just dig in your heart and think if it was your child, your grandchild, your niece, your nephew, what kind of life you would want them to have. Thank you.
Thank you. Item number 1 on our agenda is discussion, adjustment, approval of the consent agenda as presented. Any discussion or motion?
Move for approval.
Have a motion on the floor for approval. Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, none, motion carried. Now for new business, item number 2, a resolution of support for Upper Neuse River Basin Association Sensitive Principles 2 to guide revisions to Falls Lake rules. Mr. Chris Bowley. Good morning, sir.
Morning, Chairman and Commissioners. The Upper Neuse River Basin Association is one that Person County is a member of with several other local governments. We have 3 watersheds that overlay our county. And the science behind the analysis of that culminates in consensus principles that's happened in round 1, and now there's been enough science to come up with a revision to that, which allows for consensus principles number 2. And with that, I'd like to introduce Mr. Forrest Westall, the Executive Director of the UNRBA. Thank you. That's the one. If not, they're watching along.
Thank you. Good morning.
Good morning.
It's good to be with you this morning. I appreciate it. It's been a little while since I've been up here with you. It's been a few years ago, but I'm grateful to be with you. I am Forrest Westall, as Chris said. I have been the executive director for 12 years at the UNRBA and have managed and oversaw the work that we're doing. It's been extremely important work, and you all deal with a lot of different issues. This is one issue that I hope we can get some direction from you all and support in what we're trying to do. So quickly, the Upper Neuse River Basin Association has 6 counties and 7 municipalities and 1 water utility. 14 members, 14 local government members, and the Soil and Water Conservation serves as an ad hoc member of it as well. We have a lot of stakeholders involved in this. We have agriculture, DOT, land conservation organizations, and we have the North Carolina Department of Environmental Quality and the Division of Water Resources. We've also had the state division of soil and water with the Department of Agriculture. The lake, as you well know, you all are at the top of the watershed. You're the farthest away from the lake. You all do contribute flow to the lake, and your input to the lake is a part of that overall input. One of the things we studied is the delivery of nutrients, and obviously your delivery of nutrients is less than people that are closer to the lake, but it still is a contribution. The lake is an extremely important resource. I don't know how many of you have had the opportunity to be out on it. I usually go by it, check the landing areas and everything. A lot of folks out there, a lot of folks on the lake. Lake's in pretty good condition, providing water supply for the city of Raleigh. 500,000 people use that water, so it's important to them. It was put in by the Corps of Engineers to minimize flooding. The project was never envisioned by itself as a water supply, but of course it became a water supply and obviously very important to the city of Raleigh. Protects downstream water quality because it releases flow in the river. I worked for the state regulatory agency for almost 30 years. I've been doing this for 20 years more, so I've been working for a while. And I looked at the Neuse River and very aware of it in the estuary and worked on a lot of different things. There's not a lot of flow in the Neuse River in the summertime in the 7-day, 10-year low flow, so the lake does provide that. And it's a great recreational facility. It's a regional facility. Fishing tournaments, people paddling on the lake, it's used all the time, and so it is important. The current rules that are in place were passed in 2011, and it regulates several components, one of them including point sources, discharges. The city of Durham, the town of Hillsborough, and the South Granville Water and Sewer Authority has a wastewater plant that discharges to it, but also it regulates the agriculture, and agriculture has been in the process of putting in best management practices and controlling their runoff. And it has 2 stages to it. Stage 1 it has been achieved. I'll go over that in a minute, but everybody has met that. All the jurisdictions have done it. All of the sectors have done it. They have met those requirements. Stage 2, however, is not economic. It is not technologically feasible. It is a bridge too far. to do. And one of the reasons why the UNRBA has been working, and the organization's been in effect since 1995, but in the last 12 years while I've been there, we've been working on studying the lake, evaluating the lake, determining if those stage 2 rules make sense or not, and to base it on science, and we've been doing that. And so we have an opportunity now to redefine those rules, to make them more reasonable, more cost-effective, more fair in the watershed. And that's something that I've always worked for. Public policy is extremely important. There's no need to throw money at problems. There's no need to try to identify things you cannot do. And so we have some really extraordinary information that we have developed. The new development rules have been in place since 2012. Person County's been implementing those along with their stormwater utility, which they cooperate with Granville County on, and that's been implemented since 2012. Agriculture has met their requirements on stage 2 and reduction. One of the disturbing things to me, I grew up in a rural county. My grandfather was a subsistence farmer, so I ate chickens and milk from my grandfather's farm. Small farms are important. But agriculture in this watershed has contracted by 44% since 2006. That means there's 44% less land in production. And that's not necessarily a good thing, but it is a reality. This watershed is changing. The wastewater treatment plants have put in millions of dollars, tens of millions, to meet their requirements, and they have done so. Lots of local governments have been putting in best management practices for development that was in existence in 2006. Person County's been involved in the interim alternative implementation approach, which is the approach we came up with to comply with stage 1, a reasonable investment program based on putting projects in the watershed. And Person County has done their part in doing that and met their requirements. Chris has reported on that for this past year, and the county has met its investment requirements. The stage 2 requirements are as I said, unachievable. 40% nitrogen reduction from all existing lands since 2006, and 77% of phosphorus. We evaluated that right off the bat, and it was not achievable. It's not something that could be done. And so we wanted to study the lake to make sure of how the lake is responding to nutrient reductions. And through your support and the support of our other 13 members, we were able to develop a science-based approach to this. We monitored the lake from 2014 to 2018 and the watershed and the tributaries. We have been doing modeling since that time, and we have developed the best understanding of this lake and reservoir that exists anywhere in the state. This is the most studied reservoir in North Carolina. The North Carolina General Assembly created the collaboratory at UNC. That collaboratory has studied Jordan Lake, and now it's completing its study on Falls Lake. We've been working in conjunction with them. They've been studying for 4 years. We've been studying for 10 years. And we have finally come out with our recommendations and our evaluations, and we have discovered some really important things about this watershed. First of all, the watershed is not developed. It doesn't have a lot of impervious area in it. Only about 14% of the watershed is even considered developed out of a 770 square mile watershed. And only 1.5%, 1.5% of the watershed is dense development, like downtown Durham or downtown Roxborough. That's the only areas that are there. And Roxborough has just a very little bitty piece of the watershed in there. So that means the watershed is mostly forest. It is almost 60% forest. And if you add in the wetlands and water surface and fallow land that's in succession, trees and shrubs are growing up in it, you have 75% of this watershed is not managed. They're not adding any nutrients to it. Nobody's applying nutrients to it. Nutrients do fall out of the atmosphere. And even that's reduced by 20% since 2006 because of air control requirements on fossil fuel plants and on automobiles. So we have a watershed that is driven by a very small amount of development and mostly by the watershed. One of the things we discovered is, forests are not zero effect. They have nutrients too. Nutrients run off of forest land. and it runs off of wetlands, and it runs off of fallow land, and it runs off of other areas. And when you take this chart and you do the modeling for the watershed, roughly 50% of the nitrogen and 50% of the phosphorus comes from unmanaged lands. So you're basically saying you've got to reduce everything from every piece of land that's in the watershed to meet the 40 and the 77%. And that just isn't reasonable, nor is it beneficial. The good thing about it is the water quality and the algae levels in the lake are stable. They've been stable for over 10 years. And there's not any increase in impact. We've seen about a 30% reduction in nutrients, nitrogen, since 2006. The lake has not gotten any worse. The lake is not having any problems. It's meeting its intended uses. It can't meet chlorophyll A, but the other part of our study and evaluation is we ran the models we developed and said, what if this watershed was all forested? Still didn't meet the standard. If there was nobody in this watershed, it wouldn't meet the standard. And so we know that that's not a reasonable thing. But what we would like to do and what we believe is reasonable is trying to keep the lake where it's at, not trying to make it worse or cause problems in the future. It's going to be part of this watershed forever. And you can guarantee that if the water quality in that lake gets bad, they're going to come looking and they're going to be putting more pressure on the folks in the watershed. So we want to do a revised nutrient management strategy that's based on what we know. We're not going to get any large-scale nutrient reductions. There is no ability to turn that valve off. You can't do it. It isn't possible. Long-term nutrient management is the most effective, and that long-term nutrient management needs to be cost-effective. It doesn't need to be. The projected cost for the stage 2 requirements for all the regulated communities and people in the watershed was estimated at $1 billion. $1 billion. Total, stage 1 and stage 2, $1.5 billion. For a watershed of about 300,000 people, that's a lot of money, and it's extremely high cost to the local governments. And if I believe that it would cause a great improvement to the lake, then I would say, okay, maybe that makes sense, but it won't. Our studies, we ran the models at 20% reduction in nitrogen, didn't really change the chlorophyll A in the lake. Nitrogens are cycled in this sediment and in this lake, and so it's not something that's going to be changed by controlling the runoff in the watershed. But what we can do is try to hold the watershed where it's at, try to keep it doing that way. We need economic development in this watershed. Person County needs it. All of the other watersheds need it. We have to have that go forward. So as we do that, we keep in place the new development rules. I know those are costs. There's a cost associated with those. But when you're controlling nutrients, you don't want to add any additional nutrients. So for the other nutrients, places there, we believe that it makes more sense to do a collective program where you invest in the watershed, like we're doing in the IAIA. Right now, the jurisdictions in the watershed are investing about $1.5 million a year. Person County is a part of that. Your contribution is somewhere around $100,000. That is mostly contributed by the city of Raleigh and Durham, which probably put more than $800,000, $900,000 in that effort, which makes sense. One of the reasons this is a good program is Raleigh's at the table. They're not just looking to you to control, they're putting money into it as well. And I think that must continue to occur. We need the support of our stakeholders. We need the support of our members. We need to be able to push this forward. The state of North Carolina, the General Assembly said has got to start readopting these rules in 2024. We're going to make our report in December. What we're trying to do right now is get all of our jurisdictions together, all 14 of them, and Chris has been coming to our meeting, and I'm sure he's been reporting to you all and to the county on what's been done there. And we're looking for the support of all of our jurisdictions, all 14 of them, to pass a resolution saying the consensus principles are something that you all would support. The consensus principles are fairly simple. There's 16 of them. We agree the lake needs to be protected. We need these rules to be passed expeditiously. The reason is this date is already 2018 was the last. You know, we need to get them in place now by while we know it, because we'll forget what we know. Just like everything else, I've slept and I forget things all the time. But, you know, we don't need to delay this. We need to focus on watershed health, not spend a lot of money trying to get reductions we can't get. We're not going to be able to reduce nutrients significantly, but let's focus on doing projects in the watershed because they benefit Person County, they benefit Orange County, they benefit Durham County and all the other counties, Granville. So we want to incorporate adaptive management, which means we want to evaluate how we're going. Look every 5 years to see what we're doing, look 25 years to see how much progress we have. But we need stability in this watershed, and you all need determination on what you're going to do. It is easier to measure investment than it is pounds of nutrient reduction. It's just hard to reduce nutrients from existing land development. So we want to have a joint compliance program where all of the jurisdictions in the watershed participate. We want to avoid requirements for natural areas. You know, we did run the model and said, what would you have to do to meet it? You would have to control runoff from forest land to meet the standard. That makes no sense. We're not going to treat forest land. We're not going to treat undeveloped areas. We're not going to treat unmanaged areas. That doesn't make any sense. So we want to make sure we don't do that. We want to promote land conservation. That's a voluntary program. We're not forcing anybody to preserve their land. We are asking people to consider that. And there's a lot of agencies and groups that are doing that. And that's a good thing to do. So we want to do that. In fact, in some cases, it can allow people to hold on to their land because they can issue easements and still keep their land and their family. We want to establish a watershed organization. UNRBA is already there, but we need somebody to coordinate that. You all do. It's better for local people to manage local issues than Raleigh to manage your issues. It just doesn't work well because you know what's on the ground. Plus, Raleigh don't have a lot of resources either. We want to continue implementing the due development rules. We want to provide a requirement that allows people to subdivide land for their children where we don't add a lot of cost. That's been one of the complaints is if you subdivide a piece of land for a child and they're going to build a house on it, sometimes they have to spend $2,500, $3,000 with an engineer. We don't think that's reasonable. We think that that shouldn't cost them, the property owners, to do that. We need to optimize the treatment of the treatment plants. We need to make sure that those treatment plants are doing the very best that they can, but we don't want to spend a lot of extra on that because there's not a lot of additional reduction we can get. We want to allow credits for poorly performing on-site treatment systems. On-site treatment systems contribute less than 0.5% of the nutrients in this water. 50% of the people are on septic tanks and drain fields. They work. They're good, but when you get one that's not functioning, you should fix it. So we still think that that needs to be there. Need to expand, a list of activities and potential partners. We'd like to see agriculture and DOT become a part of it. So we could work together as a whole in the watershed, not work against each other and not siloed, but to be together and working together for the same objective. We want to have equitable stakeholder participation, which means, very simply, is that investment should be based on the contribution from the area, not on any other rule. Right now, we're doing that based on land area that's in the watershed. And we want to evaluate the chlorophyll A water quality standard and assessment method because we believe the lake's meeting its intended uses. There really shouldn't be an issue with chlorophyll A in the lake. It's meeting those requirements. Person County has a joint comprehensive land use plan for Roxborough and Person County. We compared that to our guiding principles, and they align very well. They're very consistent with what the Person County's identified as their goals in the future. And so the next steps are we want to submit our comments in December. We're going out to all local governments, all jurisdictions. I've been to several already. I've got a few more to do. And I'm glad to be with you all today to ask you to consider the resolution that Chris has that we developed and to adopt that to give us authority to negotiate on the drafting of the rule. You're not committing anything right now. You're not buying the farm. You're not signing off on the farm. What you're saying is we think these are good principles for negotiating with the state. When the rules do come out, we'll have an opportunity to review those again. And we'll have an opportunity to bring those to you and discuss those, and that will be something that will be moving forward. DWR says that it's going to take till 2027. I hope not. I may not be here in 2027, but I'll continue to work as long as I can and as long as my wife lets me, and on this because I think it's a great thing. I've been working on this for 48 years now, and I think this is one of the best projects I've ever worked on. It's one of the most important public policy issues around, and I'm hopeful that we can come up with a good solution for this watershed and for the people in this watershed. So there's our information. We have hundreds of pages of information. It'll put you to sleep. But we have done a lot of good work, and I hope that you all can support the resolution. But if you have any questions, we'd be glad to try to answer those.
Board member questions?
Chairman Powell,
Yes, sir.
I used to fish that lake. I was in a bass club, and we fished that lake twice a year. Now, this was in the 80s and 90s. The shorelines that I encountered were very shallow. And at one point in time, there was a lot of contamination by septic tanks and human waste. Has there been any thought on when the summer months come around and the lake draws down, because it does go down in the summer? Been any thought put into digging it deeper around the shorelines and dredging around to deepen that?
That's been a discussion. It would help if the lake were deeper. Obviously, down at the dam, it's much better than it is up in those arms
Right,
and around
yeah,
the edges.
yeah,
The
yeah.
problem, of course, is I've been involved, there's, in the Clean Water Act, the federal Clean Water has a provision they call the Clean Lakes provision. And they dredged out a bunch of small lakes to improve them. But the cost is extraordinarily high. And the biggest problem is, what do you do with the stuff you dig out? That ends up being the hugest problem, is because most of that's done with a hydraulic dredge, where you sit out there and it grinds up the dirt on the bottom and then pumps it to another facility, another boat, and they carry it off and put it up. So, I mean, that would definitely improve it. And there's been some thought about doing that. There might be some opportunity to do that in individual arms or places where there's support for that. That might be a project, that would be a part of the funding for this. If a county proposed that in one of their arms, that would be something to consider. But it would have to be purchased, it'd have to be paid for. And the question is who would pay for that? It can be done.
Correct me if I'm wrong, Raleigh is the main source of use of this lake water.
It is for water supply.
There's a lot of money in Raleigh too.
Well, there is a lot of money, and we've been collecting more money. Raleigh supports about 40 or 50% of all of the cost of the UNRBA, and that's not the case over in Jordan. The people up in Greensboro aren't paying for that, but Raleigh, Raleigh has. The people in Greensboro have the requirements put on them, but Cary and Apex are not necessarily paying those bills. Raleigh has been stepping up to the plate and paying those bills. So that's been a good part of this program, and one of the reasons why I think it's been effective is because Raleigh's been willing to pay. But yes, we hope to keep them at the table. They complain. They say, well, the people in the watershed are causing the nutrients. They should have to pay. And I keep telling them they ain't going to keep the people in there. And they passed the law in 2008 to have these rules adopted. I keep reminding them it's not 2008 anymore. The legislature's not the same. The General Assembly's not the same. And people don't want to be required to do things that don't make sense. And so we're going to continue to pressure them. And the General Assembly is always an option in dealing with this. We'd rather deal on a scientific basis, but if we run into a brick wall, we'll deal with that too.
On another point, on the shallowness, it's not just on the shorelines. It's primarily the whole lake. You've got your river that Falls Lake River. That's the deepest point.
Yeah.
Until it gets to the dam.
Right.
You're talking about, you had to be careful everywhere you went when you were fishing. In bass fishing, you slinging a lure all day long. So we get hung up in trees and snags in the stumps in the ground.
Right.
So anyway, I think that's one of the gravest concerns of mine, is why that hasn't been addressed. I know you just said it costs money. I understand that. But Raleigh's big, Durham's big, but Durham doesn't pull water from that, correct?
Right.
But Raleigh is,
Right.
and that's the primary source, if I'm not mistaken, for Raleigh.
Well, that is their primary source,
Right,
absolutely.
right.
That's their main source of water, that is there. And of course, when you drive across I-85 there, when you look upstream, toward Durham and Ellerby Creek and the drainage that comes in from the main 5 tributary, it looks like a big body of water. It's about 3 foot deep. There's
Exactly.
nothing there.
Exactly.
And you can drive a boat across it and it'll stir up sediment because you can't get.
And how
deep
quick
enough.
it can get contaminated.
You know, this has been, we have always said that these are forebays that are actually treating the water before it goes into the main part of the lake. And it would have been
To a
better.
degree, yeah.
You know, a natural lake, this is not a natural lake, it's a drowned river. They built a dam and they drowned the river. And you're right down through the middle. We did a extensive study of the bottom of that lake, the most extensive study available for any lake in North Carolina. We looked at the depth of the sediments and we looked at the depth of the lake itself. So we have a very good picture of the shallow areas around the lake. There is really only one deep section of the lake, and that's in the lower section below 98, Highway 98. But it is a challenge, and it would have been better to have dredged the lake when they built it, but they didn't do that.
Well, you've answered my questions, and if I were in your position, I would be attacking that issue to get it deeper.
Well, as I
The
said, we've
deeper,
discussed it.
the more purified it is.
Absolutely, and we've discussed that and several times. I will tell you, it is cost prohibitive. It is huge. $1.5 billion wouldn't get close to it.
Money doesn't affect Raleigh.
$1.5 billion might affect them.
I don't believe so.
When you start putting a B on there, it gets starting affected. I mean, the state budget's only $20 billion for the whole state of North Carolina.
Well, I'm like you. I'm a country boy. I eat chickens and eggs and drink the fresh milk too, fresh butter.
Yeah.
So I can relate. But I also have a great bit of knowledge on Lake,
Right.
Falls Lake, and our lakes here, of course. And I know we have, 3 tributaries that contribute to? Yeah.
Right.
Anyway, thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Mr. Chair, and Charlie, I have sentiments just like you. I grew up on that lake. I was there when they built the dam. I had family that owned land that was flooded. We had to deal with the Corps of Engineers.
Right.
Not a good group to deal with, I'm gonna tell you.
No.
And you have to go through a lot of hoops with them, and I'm not sure all the things you want to do, all the things you want to do, it still has to go through the legislature, but then you're dealing with the Corps of Engineers. And I know what I see, because I grew up there, is the development around that lake. You can say it's not right there on the watershed, or they're not right there on the lake, but all these subdivisions are exploding out that way, and that runoff's got to go somewhere. And it's got to go, in my opinion, it's got to go to Falls Lake. And they're the ones, here we are handcuffed in our county with some of the regulations they put in place. And in my opinion, they're the ones that, if you want to look at who's polluting the lake, it's that group around there. It's Raleigh, Durham, Chapel Hill, not Chapel Hill, Raleigh, Durham. And because as I said, I grew up there, I've lived there, I watched the changes on that lake. It was a great thing when they put it in. As Charlie said, it's a shallow lake. I've seen boats run their props up on stumps. I've seen accidents on that lake. People think they're in 10 foot of water and they're only in 2 foot of water. It's a dangerous lake if you don't know what you're doing in that lake, because it's a flooded river. But anyway, I appreciate what you're doing, but what I really want to see is our county here not be handcuffed as much as we have been, and to where we can sit there and fight that, because again, in my opinion, we don't contribute nearly the pollution, if you want to call it pollution, that Raleigh and Durham do. And that's just been disappointing since we've started talking about this years ago. So anyway, hopefully we can get that resolved down the road, but it's going to take legislature and it's going to take Corps of Engineers. So.
Well, one of our principles that I mentioned is equity, and we certainly want to make sure that the requirements fit the contribution. I will say that all of that development that's being done today is following the same new development rules that you are. They're putting in stormwater control measures as part of it. The problem is money. these developers have money, and it's a cost of doing business. They'll put in stormwater retention basins. If they've got 200, 500 subdivision lots, they'll still put the runoff in there, but it's still gonna develop. And that's why conservation is an important part of what we try to do. And I understand exactly. I live in a county that's economically stressed, and it's hard to see the development around us and the increase of their tax base when we're not getting it. But, we're trying to be as equitable as we can in our negotiations. We're trying to be as fair as we can to not place undue burden on the people that are contributing a small amount versus those that are contributing a large amount. And that's one of the reasons to continue to look at this, because over time, the distribution of loading is gonna change. We need to look at it so we know what's changing in the watershed. And those areas you're developing are probably gonna be putting in more nutrients than they are today. And that's something that needs to be taken credit or taken care of in the future. But you're right. We're working on that.
Mr. Chairman, if I may briefly, not to prolong this too much longer, but, you all know I'm headed toward the bar in Asheville retirement. I have been amazed in the last year or so how many issues have come full circle from my schooling and my career. My first legal job was long ago, 45 years ago, was as a legal intern, Commissioner Sims, for the Corps of Engineers in my hometown of Wilmington, helping to acquire the land for what became Falls Lake a long time ago. And then I stood there in the General Assembly all those years. I represented municipalities and worked with the regulators on these issues. Had my hands in the discussion about the watershed protection law, the phosphorus detergent ban, remember that, Forrest? The water supply planning law, the stormwater utility fee bills. And, what we kept telling the legislature was exactly what Forrest said. The department, in developing rules to address water pollution, nutrient contribution issues, needs to be focused on science, adopt science-based rules that will actually address the problems you're trying to solve, allow flexibility on the means to achieve what you're trying to do, no one-size-fits-all mandates, apply the rules to everyone who contributes, don't leave out agriculture, forestry, anybody else, but treat everybody fairly based on their contribution to the problem. And no unachievable requirements, and give us time working together. All those years, Christy, that I taught the intergovernmental relations course in the MPA program at UNC, one of the shining examples I held out to them was the Upper Neuse River Basin Association. Local governments throughout that basin, upper and lower, come together to address the issues that they all had together, cooperatively, responsibly, and responsively in ways that made sense. And I had the former Raleigh city manager come speak to students, who was instrumental in forming the association in the first place. For what it's worth, just because of the legal issues involved, I certainly commend the resolution and these principles in the association's documents to the board. I think it's in Person County's interest.
Any other comments? Anybody? Mr. Westall, I could only echo some of the sentiments that have been said here. We look to you and your group, as well as our local planning director, to sort of protect the people and their interests in Person County. We have been enormously impacted by watershed issues. And that has been, as Commissioner Sims has mentioned, coming out of Raleigh, beyond our control. We are very rural, yet still we value rural property here in Person County. We value the farmland, and that is exhibited by some of the plans that the city and the county joined together a couple of years ago to go forward with, and we want to continue doing that. I think our farmers are very in tune with and understand the nutrient levels that they put out on our cropland. Not only is that good for the watershed, it's good for them economically. I mean, they save money by being good stewards of the land, as well as science and applying nutrients, and so I think they're doing a good job. But we are going to depend on you folks to protect our interests here. It is important to economic growth in the county that as we go forward, so we want to consider that. You know, we're blessed in the sense that we've got 3 watersheds in the county, but we're cursed by being at the upper level. The news starts right out here, probably a mile from where we are. And if you travel to the coast, you see signs all the way, part of the Neuse River Basin. And so it's a long arm of watershed there, so it's an important issue. And I have read over the resolution. To me, it makes sense, but I just hope I hope it will work. I hope it'll be effective. I hope somebody in Raleigh will pay attention. And you mentioned the future a little bit, going out several years, say 5 years. Should we address, or maybe put it on a long-range calendar to come back and revisit this in X number of years, or do you guys do that automatically?
I think it needs to be included in the rules. It needs to be a requirement to look back, and we also need to make sure the state pays its portion of that. The UNRBA, your contributions have paid for this 10-year study. That's unprecedented. Most time local governments don't do that. They depend on the state. Don't depend on the state.
Well,
You know?
Trust and
Because
verify.
your interests are better served by your looking at this as opposed to the state. So you paid for that, but in the future, I think the UNRBA and this watershed organization needs to work with the state to evaluate this every 5 years and then do a big evaluation in 25 years to go back and look at it again, because I think you have to evaluate the watershed as it changes. And I think that's extremely important. One of the things I'd say about the UNRBA is Person County has 1 vote. Raleigh has 1 vote. You have as much voting power as Raleigh does in the UNRBA. Now, you know, my job is to equally represent everybody, and I do that. And Raleigh's complained about the money they put in. I've told them you need to stay at the table, because if you don't stay at the table, if I represent the other people in the watershed, I'm going to tell you that lake is meeting its uses. We're not sure we need to do anything. I mean, that's my job, is to represent the membership, just like an attorney's job is to represent their client. So keeping Raleigh there in a role is important. You all need to have your voice heard. It doesn't need to be quiet. And Chris is coming to our meetings. Stay engaged with the UNRBA. Keep folks coming there to find out what's going on. And, you know, I've been there 12 years. I won't be there 12 more years. So I'm hoping to see the rules get readopted, but I don't know exactly what that means either. So
I'm sort of like Commissioner Palmer here. I don't believe in the saying, I'm from Raleigh and I'm here to help.
yeah.
That doesn't always work. But to Person County's credit, to help us along these lines, you know, we did fund, but primarily the state should be taking care of this, and not the burden on the local taxpayers. So,
I appreciate it.
any other comments?
Just to echo what each of you already said, I hope some good does come out of this. Back when this was started and introduced by Mr. Jim Wren, the county fought it as hard as they could. Actually voted against it, and by that time it was state regulated, and we were going to be fined $25,000 a day if we did not come into compliance with that. So they did handcuff us, and it was unfortunate, but I value the work that you do, and I hope, like I said, I hope we can continue to ease the burden on the taxpayers of Person County on it.
Any other questions, anyone? All right. So we do have a resolution. What's the desire of the board?
Motion to approve.
Have a motion on the floor to approve the resolution as presented. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? None, motion
Thank
carried.
you, appreciate it.
Thank you very much. Next item on the agenda is options for organization and governance of human services agencies. Manager Kathy.
I'd like to welcome Christy Nikodem to our meeting this morning. She is the Robert W. Bradshaw Jr. Distinguished Term Assistant Professor of Public Law and Government at the UNC School of Government. She is here to do a presentation for the board and to answer questions regarding various options for the organization and governance of human services agencies in North Carolina. She is an expert in human services law, which does include this topic. So thank you for being here with us this morning.
Thank you, Catherine. Good to be with
Good
all
morning.
of you. Good morning. Is there a way to, there we go, perfect. Okay. So we're going to start by talking about the option that's in place in your county currently. We have two separate departments here for social services and health department. And this is still the governance option and organization option that's in place in most counties in North Carolina. It was the option that was in place in almost all counties prior to 2012 when the General Assembly changed the law. So you have a separate Department of Social Services, separate health department, governed by two separate appointed boards. The way those boards are appointed is a little bit different. The Board of Health is appointed entirely by the Board of County Commissioners, whereas the DSS board is appointed in part by the Board of County Commissioners, in part by the Social Services Commission at the state level, and then you have one member who is appointed by the majority of those members. So it's a 5-member board as opposed to the Board of Health, which is an 11-member board. And in this model, all employees are subject to the State Human Resources Act, which is different, obviously, than most county employees who are not subject to that act, and somewhat constrains the county in terms of what they can do with respect to employment policies. The other key feature of this model that's different than some of the other models we're going to talk about is that the director answers to the board, and the board is responsible for appointing, evaluating, disciplining, and ultimately terminating the director in both of these models. So these are the three other models that opened up in 2012. So when the General Assembly changed the law in 2012, prior to that change in the law, only agencies or only counties with over 425,000 people, which at the time was Wake, Mecklenburg, and Guilford, could exercise these options. And so the law changed in 2012 to open these up to all counties with a county manager. So Model 1, nothing changes about the department. You still have a separate Department of Social Services, or it could be a health department, but the Board of County Commissioners assumes the powers and duties of that governing board. So they essentially abolish the appointed governing board and take on the powers and duties of that board directly and directly govern the agency. Nothing changes about the agency itself. You're not combining departments. You're also not removing employees from the State Human Resources Act. You're solely changing the governing board. In models 2 and 3, you're actually technically creating a new agency. You're creating a consolidated human services agency. And that is combining multiple human services functions. We'll talk a little bit later about what functions could be combined into that agency. But there are two different options for the governing board. So you could either have, in Model 2, an appointed consolidated human services board that's appointed entirely by the Board of County Commissioners, a little bit similar to the Board of Health. Or you could have the Board of County Commissioners serving directly as the governing board for that agency, which you see in Model 3, in which case, again, they are taking on all of the powers and duties of the governing board for the agency in the same way that they would if they were taking on responsibility of a Board of Social Services or a Board of Health. So here are some of the key differences between these models. The two that you see in white up here are kind of the traditional model that was in place in almost all counties other than Wake and Mecklenburg prior to 2012. And this is the model that's in place here in Person County now. So you have this separate DSS with the DSS board, health department with a Board of Health, And in that model, the board hires the director. And the employees, as I said earlier, are subject to the State Human Resources Act and not solely subject to county personnel policies. The options available since 2012 are here in pink, blue, and yellow. So the pink option that we talked about earlier is the Board of County Commissioners serving directly as the DSS board or the Public Health Board. And it could be one or the other. They don't have to do both agencies. You could choose one and not the other. And in that model, it is the Board of County Commissioners serving as the DSS board or as the Board of Health who hires the director and is responsible for making employment decisions about the director. The employees stay subject to the State Human Resources Act in that model, so nothing changes about the agency. You're solely changing the governing board. The big difference here is the options in blue and yellow. That's where you would create a new consolidated human services agency. The option in blue is the one with the appointed board, all appointed by the Board of County Commissioners. The option in yellow is where the Board of County Commissioners stays as the Consolidated Human Services Board. In both models, regardless of who serves as the governing board, the big difference here is the role of the county manager with respect to the department. So in the traditional model, the county manager really does not have authority over the director or over employment decisions in the department in the same way that they might about other county departments. But in a consolidated human services agency, it is the county manager who is responsible for hiring the director with the advice and consent of the Consolidated Human Services Board. So there is a role there for the board, but the director is reporting directly to the county manager, which is a different relationship than they would have in the more traditional model. The other big difference is that the State Human Resources Act is optional. So by default, when you create a Consolidated Human Services Agency, the employees are removed from the State Human Resources Act and placed under county personnel policies in the same way that they would be for most other county departments. You have the option to keep them under the State Human Resources Act if you choose to do so, but the vast majority of counties that have consolidated have chosen to remove employees from the State Human Resources Act as part of that consolidation. So this is option number one. Just to break that down again, this could be an either or. So this is the Board of County Commissioners serving as a governing board for an agency. They could choose to do it just for DSS or just for the health department or for both. And again, nothing changes about the agency itself here, and that also means that employees stay subject to the State Human Resources Act. If the Board of County Commissioners chooses to adopt the powers and duties of a Board of Health and abolish the Board of Health, then they are required to appoint an advisory committee for public health that essentially has the same membership as a Board of Health, but does not have the same powers and duties. They essentially act as an advisory committee to the Board of County Commissioners. There's not a corresponding requirement for social services. If the Board of County Commissioners becomes the governing board for social services, though obviously the board is free to appoint an advisory committee for social services if they choose to do so. And again, to reiterate the options for a consolidated human services agency, you could have either as the governing board an appointed governing board or the Board of County Commissioners serving as the Consolidated Human Services Board. And if your Consolidated Human Services Agency were to include both social services and public health, that would mean that the Board of County Commissioners was assuming the full powers and duties of both a Board of Health and the Board of Social Services. So what makes a consolidated agency unique? We've talked about a few of these differences so far. The consolidated director, the director of the agency, has to be appointed and dismissed by the county manager, not by the governing board. That's a big difference from the traditional model, although the statute does say the board has to provide advice and consent to the appointment. The director reports to the county manager instead of reporting directly to the board. They obviously have a relationship with the governing board for the agency, but they are reporting and supervised by and evaluated by the county manager. They can also, this is a big difference as well, they can only appoint staff or dismiss staff upon the approval of the county manager. So it involves the county manager more in those day-to-day hiring and dismissal decisions, or at least gives the county manager the authority to sort of veto some of those decisions if necessary, or be more involved in those decisions. And then the other big difference is with respect to the employees, which we talked about earlier. The consolidated agency employees will be subject to county policies unless the Board of County Commissioners chooses to keep them subject to the State Human Resources Act. The county does have to comply with federal merit personnel system standards with respect to those employees, as we're going to talk about a little bit later. And those are principles, those are standards that are sort of already embraced in the State Human Resources Act. That's part of the reason for requiring counties to comply with the State Human Resources Act with respect to DSS employees and public health employees, because those agencies receive lots of federal funding that makes states and counties required to comply with these standards. So that requirement is just a way of making sure that counties are still complying with those standards even if they remove employees from the State Human Resources Act. But we'll look a little bit later at what those standards mean. What goes into a consolidated human services agency? The statute does not require a particular mix of human services. The statute contemplates that at the very least, social services and public health could be combined, but it could be an either or. It does not have to be both. It could also include other county human services departments, functions, or programs. So you'll see here a few examples of different counties. We have 30 consolidated counties in North Carolina. So all of them have a slightly different mix of human services. But you can see a few here. So in Gaston County, they have public health, social services, transportation, aging and adult services, services for the blind, all in their consolidated agency. In Guilford, they have public health, social services, and transportation. Cabarrus is a little bit of an outlier. They are the one county in North Carolina that does not have public health in their consolidated agency. They have social services, aging and adult services, and transportation, and I think they may have added some more human services programs recently, but they do not have public health. They still have a separate health department in addition to their consolidated agency. So the statute does not define the term human services, which leaves it a little bit open to interpretation for counties that are sort of picking and choosing what functions might go into that agency. But in general, I think counties often try to look for functions that are similar in some way to social services and public health, or are in some way serving the citizens of the county and meeting human needs. There are also different options for the internal structure of the consolidated agency. So we talked about structure in terms of governance, but there are also options for how it's structured internally. So in all of these, the consolidated human services director is reporting to the county manager. But then there's a question of, well, who is the social services director or who is the public health director? Let's say in a model where you're combining both social services and public health into the agency. And counties have done this lots of different ways. So in some counties, the consolidated director is either the existing social services director or the existing public health director, and they continue to kind of wear two hats. They continue to act as the social services director or public health director while also acting as the director of the consolidated agency. And then they might have a director of another human services function, whether public health or social services, who reports to them. In other counties, the county has hired a separate consolidated agency director who supervises the public health and social services directors. You have these two sort of division heads who report up to the consolidated agency director. Sometimes that's another employee who is hired by the county or appointed from a different department or from within the social services or public health department. Sometimes it's an assistant county manager. There are a number of counties that have an assistant county manager serving as the consolidated human services director, and then have these division heads, social services and public health and maybe other human services functions who report to them. So lots of different options there for structuring. There are some decisions when forming a consolidated agency. So who's going to govern? Obviously, is it going to be the Board of County Commissioners or the appointed Consolidated Human Services Board? And remember, in either governance model, the county manager's authority over the department stays the same. So this is really about who's taking on the other powers and duties of that governing board, because the county manager is going to stay responsible for those employment decisions instead of the board. Which county functions and departments should be included in the agency? Will the employees be removed from the State Human Resources Act? That's the default when you consolidate, but you can change that by resolution, the resolution that creates the consolidated agency if you want to do so. And who will be appointed as the Consolidated Human Services Director. Those are all options that the county has to think about. There are also some logistical decisions. So is a public hearing needed? If the Board of County Commissioners is going to serve as the governing board for one of these agencies, whether that's a standalone Department of Social Services, standalone health department, or for a new consolidated agency, there has to be a public hearing with at least 30 days notice in advance of that hearing. So the decision can happen at the end of that hearing. It doesn't have to happen at a later meeting, but there has to be at least 30 days notice leading up to it. That's not technically required for a consolidated agency that has an appointed consolidated board. So it's only when the Board of County Commissioners is going to be serving as the governing board, either for a standalone agency or a consolidated agency, that the statute requires that public hearing. Although I think a lot of counties have chosen to do a public hearing when they consolidate anyway, just to get public input and present the options to the public. There's a question about physical integration. Some counties have chosen to either immediately or eventually over time integrate the functions that they consolidate into a single agency. So they have either built a new building or moved employees into an existing building to try to actually integrate those functions on the ground. In other counties, the departments that are consolidated are still operating relatively separately. If you go to Guilford County, for example, you still have a health department building and a social services department building, even though they are a consolidated human services agency. There's also a question of whether there are new positions needed, especially if you choose to hire a consolidated director who is over, a social services director and or a public health director, or whether that will be someone who's hired internally from the county. And a question of whether there will be any revisions to the county personnel policies needed. So if you choose to remove employees from the State Human Resources Act, are there any revisions that are needed to reflect the fact that these social services employees or public health employees are going to be coming under the county personnel policies? I have here a slide with the Federal Merit Personnel System standards. You can see these are fairly short, and they're also written in a fairly high level of generality. This is not the sort of granular, in the weeds sort of requirements that we see from the State Human Resources Act. So the county is required to comply with these requirements with respect to those consolidated agency employees. But these are fairly broad requirements that would be reflected in the State Human Resources Act anyway. But it does not subject you to the same sort of classification and pay structures and employment protections that you might find in the State Human Resources Act on the same granular level. These are more broad, high-level principles that the county is required to comply with. And again, this is because of the federal funding, the large amount of federal funding that comes in for public health and social services. When the General Assembly changed the law, they needed to make sure that counties were still going to comply with these requirements that are a condition of receiving grants for those services. If you are interested in creating a consolidated human services agency, there is an order because of the way the statute lays out the role of the board in providing advice and consent to the director's appointment. There's an order of actions. So the first would be to establish the Consolidated Human Services Agency, which can be done through a resolution, appointing the Consolidated Human Services Board, or having the Board of County Commissioners assume the powers and duties of that board. The county manager then identifies a director candidate and seeks the advice and consent of that newly formed Consolidated Human Services Board. And if the board consents to the appointment, the county manager can then appoint the Consolidated Human Services Director. So creating the initial board for a Consolidated Human Services Agency, if you choose to have an appointed board, the Board of County Commissioners creates a nominating committee that is comprised of members of the current pre-consolidation Board of Health and Social Services Board, as well as the board responsible for managing mental health, developmental disabilities, and substance abuse services in the county. And you might say, well, why is that board involved since they are not a part of the consolidated agency? And this is just a weird quirk of history that they ended up in the statute. It used to be Mecklenburg County's consolidated agency included mental health, developmental disabilities, and substance abuse services. And when the statute was changed, counties can no longer obviously include these things in their consolidated agency. But when the statute was changed, it did not ultimately reflect that. So the language is still in the statute that counties have to have members of that board involved in the nominating committee as well.
There's always a simple reason. The reason there was Senator Kenneth Royal. So
There you go. The nominating committee then recommends basically a slate of members for the new Consolidated Human Services Board. The Board of County Commissioners makes appointments based on those recommendations. The general term of membership for a Consolidated Human Services Board member is 4 years. They typically serve 4-year terms. But the initial membership can be staggered, so you could appoint some members for less than a 4-year term in order to stagger terms, so you don't have everyone rolling off at once. And then for subsequent vacancies, you would fill those vacancies based on nominees presented by the members of that board. The composition of the Consolidated Human Services Board looks a fair amount like a Board of Health. It's got a few different requirements, but it looks relatively similar. You have to have 4 persons who are consumers of human services. It's a very broadly worded term. Again, leaves a lot open to interpretation for the county in terms of who's a consumer of a human service. 8 persons who are professionals with various different qualifications. So you have to have a psychologist, a pharmacist, an engineer, a dentist, an optometrist, a veterinarian, a social worker, and a registered nurse. 2 physicians licensed to practice medicine in North Carolina, one of whom is a psychiatrist, 1 county commissioner, and then you could have other individuals as well, up to 25 members. Everyone has to be a resident of the county. So just to show you how things have changed in the state, these were the organization and governance models that were in place in 2012, right before the law changed. So we have in Wake County a consolidated agency with a consolidated human services board, and in Mecklenburg a consolidated agency with the Board of County Commissioners serving as the governing board. And then the rest of the state was in these models with a separate Department of Social Services and separate health department with separate appointed governing boards. And you can see we have much more of a patchwork that's developed over the past decade or so. In white, you still have the counties here that have separate agencies with separate appointed governing boards. In pink, you can see counties where either social services and or public health are governed directly by the Board of County Commissioners. So these are counties that have not consolidated. They don't have a consolidated human services agency. It's just the Board of County Commissioners acting as the governing board for an agency, either social services and or public health. In blue, you see consolidated agencies with appointed consolidated human services boards. And in yellow, you see consolidated agencies with the Board of County Commissioners serving directly as the governing board for the agency. And so even though numbers-wise, the majority of counties in North Carolina still have separate agencies with appointed governing boards, by population size, the majority of the most populous counties in North Carolina have created consolidated agencies. And by last count, at least 50% of North Carolina's population lives in a county with a consolidated human services agency. 30 counties now have consolidated agencies. 29 of those include public health and social services, with 1, Cabarrus County, that does not include public health. 27 of those counties have opted to remove consolidated agency employees from the coverage of the State Human Resources Act. 16 have appointed boards, and 14 have boards, have agencies that are governed directly by the Board of County Commissioners. And then in 25 counties, if you're solely looking at who acts as the governing board, in 25 counties, the Board of County Commissioners acts as the governing board for social services. In 11 of those counties, the Board of County Commissioners is governing a standalone department of social services. In 14 of those counties, the Board of County Commissioners is acting as the governing board for a consolidated agency. And I think it's only 4 counties in North Carolina where the Board of County Commissioners acts as the governing board for public health for a standalone public health department. If you're interested in exploring more, this is my website that I've set up with consolidated agency resources, social services resources, public health resources. There's more information here about options for organization and governance of human services agencies in North Carolina if you click on that tab with the state flag. There's also let's see, a map here. There's a series of interactive maps on that page that will show, you can click select a view and go by agency structure, by board structure, and highlight which counties have which options in place if you're interested in exploring more about what other counties in North Carolina have done. And with that, I'm happy to take questions if anyone has any.
Board members, questions?
I don't think I have any questions, Chairman Powell, but I do have a lot of stats. If y'all will give me just a few minutes. All right. I ran through the previous year and I think 6 months of emails for county employment, the loss of employees through our Department of Social Services. Found that there was a total of 49 positions lost in the last 18 months. Somebody's phone making some noise. 36 position replacements from February of 22 through January 26 of this year. 13 positions from March of this year through this month, with only currently 4 months into the new calendar year. Positions lost: social worker 2, work first position, level 2. Foster care, social worker in a 16-month time frame, 6 positions of loss. 20 positions lost, social workers level 2. 10 level 3 social worker employee turnovers. Now, I don't know what all the definitions of these positions are, but I'm just giving you stats of what I've got off the emails that I've received. Level 3, 1 level 3 supervisor position. 17 income caseworker positions. 1 income maintenance investigator. 3 income maintenance food and nutrition workers. 4 income maintenance caseworkers adult Medicaid. 3 income maintenance family and child Medicaid. 4 social worker IAT, whatever that is, child protective services and positions. 1 processing assistant level 3 self-sufficiency. 1 processing unit supervisor. 2 processing assistant level 4. 1 office assistant level 4. 2 administrative assistant level 2. I didn't write the numbers down on this page, but in December 22, I've got social worker foster care, December the 9th, social worker IAT, child protective services, October 27, 22, social worker 2 adult services, October 13th, administrative assistant 2, September the 29th, 22, income maintenance investigator, September 29th, 22, income maintenance caseworker 2, September 27th, social worker 3, level 3 adult services, September the 9th, 22, child support supervisor. September the 8th, 22, social worker, 3 foster care and adoptions. August 19th, income maintenance caseworker technician, adult Medicaid. August 18th, income maintenance supervisor, level 2. August 16th, 22, income maintenance caseworker level 2, food nutrition services. August 16th, 22, services program manager. July the 25th, 22, processing unit supervisor. July the 21st, 22, income maintenance caseworker, part-time. July the 21st, 22, income maintenance caseworker 2, adult Medicaid. 21st of July, 22, income maintenance caseworker, level 2, family and children Medicaid. July the 19th, 22, social worker, level 3, foster care and adoption. July 7th, 22, social worker, level 2, adult services. May the 20th, 22, income maintenance supervisor, level 2. May the 20th, social worker, level 3, adult services. May the 2nd, 22, income maintenance caseworker, level 2, part-time. April 11th, 22, income maintenance caseworker, level 2, full-time. April 11th, 22, income maintenance caseworker, level 3. This is mind-blowing. April the 6th, 22, social worker, IATC, child protection services. March 29th, 22, processing assistant, level 4. March 29th, 22, income maintenance caseworker, level 2. I got some more notes here. Okay, I've already covered those. 49 positions lost in that last 18 months. So that's what I dug up by looking back from the previous year and a half's emails from our Tammy Hudson, what do you call her position?
HR generalist, yes.
Human Resources.
Generalist is her position,
Generalist.
human resources generalist.
Okay, that's what has came in from 2022 through February 2022 to October 23. That's a lot of turnover, 49 positions. I just want that to be known.
Gordon, excuse me, Chairman. Just
Sure, please.
clarify. So I do want to make sure we recognize that each of those job postings doesn't necessarily signify that an employee has left and a vacancy created as a result of that. We do tend to have higher turnover within social services. That is one of the areas that experiences higher turnover, and I'll be glad to get those, the detail of that to you all. When a position is posted, sometimes it gets reposted because we weren't able to fill it. Sometimes we've offered a promotion to a higher level position, and then that creates vacancies as people move up within the organization. And we've also added many new positions over the last year and a half as well within social services. So some of that is represented in the emails that you're receiving. So I'll be glad to follow up with numbers as far as the turnover that we've experienced from people leaving the organization. But did want to note that there are a variety of reasons for why those positions show up in the emails that you just
I
referenced.
found what you're talking about. I noticed that some of them was repetitive because the position hadn't been filled yet.
Right.
But the majority of them, from my thoughts, are from turnover from talking to previous employees there.
Okay. And I can follow up with
Please
the
do.
exact figures from
Please
HR
give
on
me
that.
a tough job to have with the DSS. It's a lot of pressure with that. We've heard several comments on the DSS today. And I think going back to the reason why we're here is that we wanted to see what our options were going forward. And I don't think we're here today to make any decision on this, but it's certainly given us options to think about and look at. Yeah, it's not an easy job, and it's certainly you hear more negative than you do positive sometimes with this. But I certainly appreciate it, and in my opinion, we'll review this. I'll review it and see what we think works best for our county.
It is extremely important because DSS does deal with a segment of our population that quite frequently and often can't help themselves. So we need to intervene there, and particularly in from my perspective, our children. Previously, we've been down this path by this board and talked about this subject before. And again, previously, we were advised that we had one of two choices: leave things as they were, or combine the Department of Health. But that is not the case.
No.
So what we had been presented previously was inaccurate, which is, well, I appreciate your clarity on that and how you so very well laid out the possibilities and various routes that we could take. What you're saying is DSS could be combined with another agency such as PATS or Veterans Affairs, or doesn't have to be the Health Board.
That's right.
For-
That's right.
for-
Yeah. I mean, there are some counties that have included Veteran Services, for example, in their consolidated agency. So as long as you have two or more human services functions combined, that's sufficient to create the consolidated agency. So it doesn't have to necessarily include public health as we see in Cabarrus.
So with a combination there, those two boards would go away.
Yes.
If-
Yes.
okay,
The,
and then-
the governing boards for those agencies would be, or the
and then
functions would be abolished.
Commissioners would become the governing board.
They could, or the commissioners could appoint a governing board, either way.
And the county manager then would become the lead person there.
They would have more, the director of that agency would report to the county manager, yes. So
Exactly.
the county manager would have more authority over the agency, yes.
Yes. Okay. From the employee standpoint, what changes there?
The employees are no longer subject to the State Human Resources Act unless you choose to keep them subject to it. Which means, for example, that there's sort of less red tape and regulation around things like employment protections, just cause protections, again, depending on what you have in your existing county policies. So some counties have policies that are more similar to the State Human Resources Act. Others have policies that are a lot more different. So the amount of change for employees really depends on what they're shifting to with the county personnel policies.
So they could shift to and fall under the county HR department.
That's right.
Okay.
Yeah, by default, that's what would happen unless you chose to keep them under the State Human Resources Act.
Okay. Currently, how does that work? The employees are paid by the newly adopted salary scales that we set up. Is that correct?
Yes,
And
that is
not-
correct.
Not state.
Right, but
Anyway.
we did go through a process with the State Office of Human Resources to ensure that our new salary schedule is in alignment with what their expectations are. So currently, there are many things that we run by the Office of State Human Resources. Any new positions that get added, they do need to approve that. Any position reclassifications, new position titles that are created, that goes through Office of State Human Resources. When it comes to things such as disciplinary matters, often they are consulted, but our HR department is still very involved too. There's sort of 2 points of consultation there, and there are certain disciplinary practices that apply to them under the State Human Resources Act, as far as the director having the final decision, and then there being an appeal level beyond that to the Office of Administrative Hearings. And then when it comes to hiring, Office of State Human Resources is also involved in determining whether or not the candidates meet minimum requirements for the position. So all of those various aspects, and there are probably some others that I'm leaving out, is the role that they are currently playing within our departments of social services and health. But our HR department is still running the recruitment processes, developing the classification and pay plans, offering a variety of support and assistance as well.
So the manager would still be the supervisor?
Under the consolidated agency,
Yes.
then the manager does become a part of that. If the board assumes the role of the DSS or the health board, then the employees still stay subject to the State Human Resources Act, and those directors report directly to the Board of Commissioners in their capacity of either the health board or the social services board. And correct me if I misspeak.
That's right. So in the first option we talked about, where the Board of County Commissioners becomes the governing board for the agency but doesn't consolidate, then the county manager does not, the county manager's role doesn't change. They don't become more involved in the agency or the director doesn't report to them. The director continues to report to the board. Now they would be reporting to the Board of County Commissioners instead of an appointed board, but there would not be that direct authority of the county manager over the director or over the director's hiring decisions. So it's a little bit different than the consolidated model.
Okay.
I have a question on the funding. Is the funding change in any way, whether we go consolidated or not?
No.
And from a legal standpoint, if something were to come up legally, would that be against, does that change at all as far as what our responsibilities are on that?
You first.
I don't think so. I mean, the county is still ultimately, could still ultimately be liable in the same way that they could if you had a separate standalone department. So I don't think consolidating changes that.
Okay.
Probably does create more opportunities for the county to be named as a defendant in a lawsuit if it's filed, whether the county could be dismissed or not. Probably doesn't change the actual scope of liability.
Right, right.
Now there, yes, sir.
You mentioned new hires. I've been here for 3 years almost. Next month will be 3 years. I've seen one new hire,
What do you mean by that?
a new position. And we approved that this year, this year's budget.
New positions within social services?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. I don't remember
But there
the
could be
exact,
something I
yes,
don't
number.
remember. I
Right. We did
remember one.
approve several in this year's budget.
I think it's quite interesting that a quarter of the state has opted to make changes. That's all.
Mr. Chair, timeline, you mentioned what you've seen in the past. From the minute someone decides they want to start this, how long does it take for the process to, I know you mentioned 30 days of notice, but is that about it? 30 days and then?
I think it's entirely dependent on the county. I mean, some counties move much quicker with this and go really quick and sort of get the administrative pieces there first and have the public hearing, inform the agency, and then figure out how it's going to be implemented on the ground. Others have a longer process of figuring out how are we going to implement the integration and the consolidation before we actually consolidate. So it very much depends on the county. I think Lee County is one of the most recent to consolidate. I want to say they started talking about it in maybe January or February, and then I think it was August before they ultimately, they made the decision early, sort of in the spring to consolidate, and then it was towards the end of the summer when they actually formally consolidated and appointed a director. But other counties have certainly moved more quickly.
Any other questions, comments?
One quick question, and number one, thank you for the presentation, very eye-opening, and as the chairman had previously mentioned, it was either one or the other. That's always it's been presented to us, so this has been most enlightening. Regarding the composition of a CHS board, considering if it does not include the Board of Health, if it was DSS, PATS, Veterans Affairs, whomever, on your slide on page 15, stated that 8 persons who are professional with the qualifications of those categories, one psychologist, pharmacy, engineer, dentist, optometrist, veterinarian. If we're not combining the health department, does that still even apply? Because that's a health.
It does still apply,
That
yeah.
does still apply.
So I think that's part of what has made it an either or for some counties, is some counties say, well, we don't want the 2 appointed boards that have the same members. You know, the Board of Health has to have some of the same members that the Consolidated Human Services Board does. And for some counties, that's challenging if you have a limited number of people who can serve in those roles. But obviously, the appointed board is not the only option. The Board of County Commissioners can serve as the governing board directly, in which case you would not have to have that appointed board with those members serving on it.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, when I
Good question.
saw that, looking at the health board, I could see those boxes being checked.
Yeah, a lot of them.
Right down the,
That's
right
right.
down the list.
That's right.
Well, if no other questions, we thank you for being here. You are the writer of the book.
Yes.
So we appreciate you being here, and you can assume anything you want to about this title.
Okay. I'm glad to be with you. Thank you. Thank you all.
very much.
Thank you very much.
It's, that was all for information purposes, and we'll discuss next steps later and move along. Next on the agenda is the chairman's report. Just got a couple of things, 2 or 3 things that has happened since our last meeting that I'll pass along to the public. We did have a request and a meeting with Prospect for the mega park. And we honored that request by being on site with Prospect. And the property owners were asked to attend, and they did not attend, but we did have a good discussion there. Last week we had, the manager and I had an EQV Zoom regarding legislative updates, which weren't anything new as we moved along with the newly adopted budget and how it might impact Person County, but we did have that one. That EQV, was that the last one that we contracted?
We have one
with?
more. at the
One
end
more
of the
meeting,
month,
okay.
yes.
And I took part in an interview with Duke Energy. Last week, they had a board meeting, and that was Zoom for us. And during that interview, there were several questions that were asked, but primarily they were interested in the impact of Duke Energy in Person County, which was very easy to answer. And I reminded those board members that the impact of Duke Energy over 6 decades is immeasurable. We are what we are today economically, I believe, in large part due to Duke Energy, and wanted to emphasize the importance of continued generation here in Person County, and with the new technology that may be coming and the proposed gas combined plants here in Person County, encourage them to continue along those lines. And we had a very productive airport committee meeting last week. Talked about the runway re-strengthening project, which is underway and will require a shutdown of the airport for some days. Not sure exactly what that may be, and that'll probably be spring of '24. And also the runway extension project, which is beginning to shape up. The environmental steps required there are being undertaken, and we also discussed the possibility of, construction of a new terminal there, but, those are just some things that have or did occur after last commissioners' meeting. And that's all I have, Manager Kathy.
I have a few things to report. The 2025 reappraisal is underway. We expect that this process will take about 16 months to complete, and the first step will be updating photos of properties. So on the county website, under the tax administration page, we do have a link for reappraisal, and on that we have put photos of the appraisers and the vehicles that they'll be driving. So if the public does see them out and about, they'll know what's going on, and we will continue to share information with the public throughout this process, so that everybody does know what's going on. We have identified a date for the Charters of Freedom dedication ceremony. That will be Thursday, November 2nd at 4 p.m. And at that time, the settings will be complete, and we will be happy to share that celebration with the public. The Foundation Forward is putting together some promotional materials for that event, so we are waiting to receive those from that organization so that we can share more information. And then as far as a broadband update goes, Charter is completing some of its projects within the county with federal funding that they received. Zytel received one of the Great Grant Awards from the state, and they are still in the engineering phase for their project, and we do hope to see that started soon. Brightspeed received the second Great Grant Award, and we have signed the agreement with them, so they will be getting that project underway as well. And then the next phase is the CAB program through the state, completing access to broadband, and the county still has over $2.5 million set aside in ARPA funding to use towards broadband expansion, so we definitely see the opportunity to leverage that through the CAB program. And the next step will be for us, in terms of county staff, to work with staff at the state level to create a map of eligible addresses within Person County. And the criteria for identifying eligible addresses will be different than the criteria that was used through these other grant-funded programs. In those cases, only addresses that were deemed unserved by the criteria could be eligible for the grant award, but those definitions have evolved, and we will be seeking to serve unserved as well as underserved addresses with the CAB program. So that is going to open up many, many, many more eligible addresses. And what we'll do is we will create a map of those, and then we will release that for providers to respond with proposals for serving those addresses. So our objective will be to reach as many as possible through this next round of funding, and then we will continue to work towards serving 100% of the population, which is ultimately the goal at the federal, state, and local level with all of this funding that is currently available.
Did you have a date on the maps?
No, we have to get on the calendar, which we've
been
continue
asking
to
for
ask
that.
about.
Yeah, we've been
Right,
asking
so
about that for quite
they
a
have,
while.
at the state level, they have a couple of mappers that are working with counties, so it's a matter of being able to get us worked into the schedule.
Okay, the grants that we received, Zytel, Spectrum, county funding, this sort of thing, do they overlap or do they enhance each other? How's
They build upon each other. In this case, if an address receives a grant-funded award, they're no longer eligible to receive funding from other programs. So the programs that have been awarded so far, such as the federal funding that was awarded to Charter, made those addresses ineligible for the state awards. And now the state has awarded 2 programs. So those are covered, and they'll receive service from those 3 providers. And then we're continuing to work on identifying other other providers who may be able to serve Person County and reach those other addresses that do not currently have adequate service.
and that's where the county funding
Yes,
come
we'll be
in.
able to leverage that. The county will be eligible for up to $8 million from the state through the CAB program. And then we can leverage the $2.5+ million that we still have set aside in matching funds. And of course, the providers will be putting money into these projects as well. So there's the opportunity there for us to be able to have another very substantial project.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Sims?
Thank you. I haven't had any committee meetings since our last board meeting, but I do want to mention that we had a very successful personality festival. We had a very successful event before the personality festival, the concert, and I was working both of those events, and we had a lot of people. It was may have been the biggest crowd, but the weather was great, and again, it just shows there were several committees that worked together to make this happen. And there's several people here that I saw at the Personality Festival. And so anyway, let's support our uptown. And again, economic development's part of that. So that's all I got.
I want to
Commissioner
commit, go ahead, sir.
You up?
Yeah, okay. I want to commend you. I was watching you on the cameras. And you helped pick up the trash bags.
Yeah.
And there was a policeman standing right in the middle of the street. And this guy was dragging the bag, and the policeman just acted like he didn't do something. Help the guy. And here comes Derek to the rescue. But
That was my job.
okay, my report is I went and spent about an hour with Miss Julie Maybe, Tourism Development. She's a charming lady. If you haven't been to speak with that lady yet, I advise you. You need to go spend some time with her. We are lucky to have her, and she has a new assistant with her. Can't remember the lady's name. And I want to also add that Chandler Concrete donated the concrete for the pad of these Charters of Freedom memorials. That's all I have.
Commissioner Purdier?
No report.
Commissioner Thomas?
No report.
All right, so at this time, we'll need a motion to go into closed session.
So moved.
For General Statute 143, 318, 11A5, those permitted to attend, the County Manager Kathy Clerk to the Board, Michelle Solomon, County Attorney Ellis Hinkins, and General Services Director Ray Fashy, and Finance Director Amy Wernberg. Have a motion on the floor, discussion. Hearing none, all in favor say aye.
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 Opposed, none, motion carried.